Hi, I'm Kat, and if you're familiar with my videos, you probably know that I dye my hair using henna. I'm not interested in any prepackaged henna hair dyes. Thanks, but I'm not interested. I just use pure henna powder and pure cassia powder to add kind of a golden tint to it. That's how I get my copper color. And I use chamomile tea as the acid to release the dye. I'm not interested in using any stronger acids. I don't need something eating through my hair, and honestly, the dye works great on its own. So that's what I put in my henna. In this video, I show you how I prepare and package up my henna to be frozen. The problem I was running into before was that I was making a whole big batch of henna and then usually ending up wasting about half of it because I was only doing my roots, or I do my roots and then want to darken up my ends a little bit and layer a little bit, and then that was it. So instead of letting the dye go bad, I decided to start freezing it. I have frozen my dye for up to 3 months using this. I just ran out, and so I haven't tried freezing it for longer, but honestly, it works great. When I let the dye release initially, I usually let it sit for 5 to 6 hours tops. If you let your dye sit for too long, it can start to break down, and then the dye will basically go bad and you've wasted your henna. I don't know how long it takes to do that, but I haven't really wanted to chance it, and honestly 5 to 6 hours works just fine for me. So I usually let the dye release that long, and then when I take the bag back out of the freezer, I let it sit for 1 to 2 hours until it's just not chunky before I put it on my hair. The dye works just as great with the last batch as it does with the first one. I haven't noticed any difference in color, and that's also great if you're doing different ratios of cassia versus henna, or if you have henna versus indigo, because you know that you're going to get a consistent color time after time because you're using the same batch. So like I said, I haven't noticed any problems from batch to batch in the difference of how long it's been sitting there. Let me know below if you have experience with this, but I've been really happy with this method of storing my henna, and I think it saves a lot of cleanup time, and it saves you from wasting any of your henna. This is everything I use to prep my henna. Of course, I have the pure henna powder, I have cassia powder, and this is what I use to get that golden color rather than just red dye. Freezer bags, a glass container to mix and let the dye release in, a container for making the tea. I have 2 bags of chamomile tea, coated whisk, and of course a kettle of hot water. First, I'm just going to make a strong chamomile tea, and I'll just let that sit for about 5 to 10 minutes. Once the tea has had long enough to brew, I will add it to the powders and then mix it up. You can add more powder or liquid to get it the right consistency, and I mix mine until it's the consistency of Greek yogurt. Then I cover it loosely and leave it to sit in a warm room until the dye releases. Once your henna has sat for long enough for the dye release, and you'll be able to see it just kind of sitting on top of the dye, it'll be loose and look a little bit liquidy and much redder than the rest of the green stuff. Once the dye is released, you can stir it up and make sure that you combine it really well, and then divvy it up into the plastic bags. And in most of these bags, I'm only putting enough to touch up my roots, and then in one of them, I'll put enough henna to do a full head application in a few months when it starts to bleach out in the sun, because my hair tends to bleach out really easily, and I like to keep the color all fresh all through the ends. And ultimately your goal is to get as much of the henna dye into one corner of the bag as possible, because you're going to be cutting off a tiny, tiny tip of the corner of the bag to actually apply this to your hair. Next, I grab all of the bags together with the henna in the same corner on each one, and then I roll up the tops of them so they're all like one little package of henna bags. They're all rolled up like that. And then I take these clips that I buy that I attach to my regular hangers to turn them into skirt hangers, and I just clip that top roll together, and that way it stands up much more easily in the freezer and freezes into the right shape. Then I just pop them in the freezer, and when I'm ready to henna my hair, I'll just take one out, Leave it sitting for 1 or 2 hours until it's thawed and cut the tip off. And you really only want to cut a tiny, tiny bit off, and if you're not getting enough henna out fast enough, then make the hole larger. This is one that I previously had frozen and I left it to thaw for 2 hours. You don't want it to get too warm as it's thawing because then your dye could go bad. I haven't had any issues with my dye going bad, but if your dye gets too old, it will stop working. I have kept these in the freezer up to 3 months and had no issues.